If a gift appears where no footsteps exist, do not thank the forest because something inside it already knows your name. Emily Carter had heard that warning since she was a little girl, but she never believed the old stories whispered around evening fires. Every morning before the rest of the village opened their doors, she walked the same narrow trail, leading toward the edge of the northern forest to gather herbs and wild berries she later traded in the marketplace. Her quiet routine rarely changed, yet one chilly autumn morning something unexpected waited on the weathered wooden porch outside her tiny cottage. Resting neatly beside the front step was a perfect bundle of fresh mountain blueberries wrapped in broad green leaves that still carried tiny drops of morning dew. Emily looked around the empty clearing, expecting to find a friendly neighbor smiling behind a nearby tree, but the village remained silent. There were no footprints in the damp earth. No wagon tracks crossed the grass. Only the distant sound of birds drifted through the cool morning air. She picked up the mysterious gift, studying it carefully before carrying it inside with a puzzled smile. The following morning, another surprise appeared. This time it was a handful of bright red wild apples that did not grow anywhere near the village. The day after that came rare white mushrooms prized by every cook in the region. Then smooth river stones unlike any she had ever seen, polished until they reflected sunlight like tiny mirrors. Each gift was fresh, carefully arranged, and always waiting before sunrise. Soon the entire village began talking. Some believed a secret admirer had fallen in love with Emily. Others insisted forest spirits rewarded kind hearts with impossible treasures. A few older hunters quietly warned everyone to leave the gifts untouched because nothing in the northern woods was ever free. Emily listened politely to every opinion, but none of them answered the question she asked herself each morning. Who was leaving them there without making a sound? Curious, she decided to wake long before dawn. Wrapped in a warm coat, she sat beside her dark window while the village still slept beneath a sky filled with fading stars. Hour after hour, she watched the empty clearing outside her cottage. Nothing moved except leaves dancing in the breeze. Just as the first golden light touched the distant hills, she blinked for only a second. When she looked again, another gift rested on her porch. It was a bouquet of delicate blue forest flowers tied together with long strands of soft grass. Emily hurried outside in disbelief. Once again, there were no footprints anywhere around the cottage. Kneeling beside the flowers, she noticed something that made her heart beat a little faster. Pressed lightly into the damp soil several yards away was a single enormous paw print, far larger than any wolf she had ever imagined. It faced the forest before disappearing completely among the fallen leaves. The village hunters examined the mark later that morning and quietly exchanged uneasy glances. One elderly hunter slowly stood and spoke only 6 words. Nothing this large should exist anymore. That evening, every family locked their doors before sunset. Parents called their children inside early, and even experienced woodsmen refused to enter the northern forest after dark. Emily, however, could not stop thinking about the giant paw print or the gentle care with which every mysterious gift had been arranged. Fear and kindness rarely walked together, yet somehow they seemed inseparable here. Far beyond the village, hidden beneath towering pines where moonlight barely reached the forest floor, an enormous black wolf emerged silently from the shadows. His thick, dark fur blended perfectly with the night, while his brilliant golden eyes remained fixed upon the tiny cottage standing alone beyond the trees. At his feet rested another carefully chosen forest gift, and after one final glance toward the warm light glowing through Emily's window, the giant wolf quietly turned and disappeared deeper into the endless woods before the rising sun could reveal who he truly was. By the following afternoon, the mysterious gifts had become the only topic anyone wished to discuss. Every conversation in the marketplace eventually circled back to Emily Carter and the enormous paw print discovered outside her cottage. Some neighbors quietly suggested she should leave the village before whatever creature haunted the northern forest decided to come any closer. Others insisted the strange offerings were a warning disguised as kindness. Emily listened without arguing, yet none of their fears matched what she felt whenever she looked at the carefully chosen treasures resting on her kitchen table. Whoever had gathered them had done so with remarkable patience. The berries had always been perfectly ripe. The flowers had never been crushed. Even the smooth river stones had been cleaned until they reflected sunlight. Nothing about the gifts carried anger. They carried intention. As evening settled over the valley, the village elder ordered everyone to remain indoors after sunset until experienced hunters could search the forest. Heavy wooden doors closed earlier than usual, windows were secured, and cheerful conversations disappeared into uneasy silence. Emily stood beside her window watching darkness slowly cover the familiar tree line. She wondered whether the mysterious visitor would come again despite the growing fear surrounding the village. Somewhere beyond the forest edge, hidden beneath towering pines, a pair of brilliant golden eyes quietly observed the distant cottages. The enormous black wolf moved almost soundlessly through the undergrowth, carrying a small branch covered with bright crimson berries that only grew high among the northern cliffs. He stopped before reaching the village, lowering the gift gently onto a moss-covered stone. His sharp ears suddenly lifted. The scent of unfamiliar wolves drifted through the cool night air. Moments later, 3 wild wolves cautiously stepped into the clearing. They were smaller than the giant black wolf, but their uneasy growls revealed they had entered territory that did not belong to them. The enormous wolf remained perfectly calm. Without taking another step, he simply raised his head. His commanding presence alone caused the newcomers to freeze before quietly retreating back into the darkness without challenge. Only after the forest became silent once more did he continue toward the village. Before dawn, Emily woke unexpectedly, feeling an unexplained urge to look outside. Opening her front door, she smiled with quiet surprise. Another gift rested neatly on the porch. This time it was not fruit or flowers. It was a beautifully woven crown made entirely from delicate forest vines, tiny white blossoms, and soft green leaves that somehow remained fresh despite the cool autumn night. Emily gently picked it up, admiring the careful craftsmanship. No ordinary hunter would have taken such time creating something so thoughtful. As she examined the woven vines, she noticed a single strand of glossy black fur caught between the leaves. It was longer than any wolf fur she had ever seen and shimmered faintly beneath the morning sun. Later that day, she carried the unusual strand to the elderly hunter who had examined the giant paw print. He studied it for a long time before quietly returning it to her. His weathered face grew unusually serious. "I have walked these forests for more than 50 years," he said softly. "I have never seen fur like this." Emily searched his expression. "Then what does it belong to?" The old hunter slowly looked toward the distant northern woods before answering with surprising honesty. "I do not know, but whatever left these gifts could have frightened you from the beginning. Instead, it keeps choosing kindness." Those words stayed with Emily long after she returned home. That evening, instead of closing her curtains, she placed the woven forest crown carefully on her windowsill where it could be seen from outside. Hidden among the shadows beyond the clearing, the giant black wolf watched the tiny gesture in complete silence, and for the first time since he had begun leaving gifts, the quiet loneliness that had followed him through countless seasons felt just a little less heavy. The next morning, Emily Carter made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of waiting behind her window and wondering who had been visiting her cottage before sunrise, she would quietly follow the truth wherever it wished to lead. Long before dawn, she dressed in a thick wool coat, slipped into sturdy leather boots, and stepped outside carrying only a small lantern that she never intended to light unless absolutely necessary. The cool autumn air wrapped around the clearing while a thin layer of silver mist drifted across the grass. She carefully walked beyond her porch and hid behind an old oak tree that overlooked the narrow path leading toward the northern forest. Every sound seemed louder than usual. A single owl called from somewhere high above. Leaves rustled softly whenever the breeze passed through the branches. Time moved slowly until the eastern horizon began turning pale with the first hint of morning. Emily remained perfectly still, determined not to blink this time. Then something unexpected happened. A pair of deer quietly emerged from the forest. Instead of appearing frightened, they calmly crossed the clearing before disappearing toward the nearby meadow. Moments later, several rabbits followed, stopping only briefly to sniff the cool air. It was almost as though every creature in the woods sensed the arrival of someone they trusted. Emily held her breath. A massive shadow slowly appeared between the towering pines. The giant black wolf stepped into the faint morning light with graceful confidence. every movement silent despite his impressive size. His dark coat shimmered with hints of deep blue beneath the rising sun, while his golden eyes scanned the clearing with careful attention. Between his strong jaws, he carried a woven basket made from flexible willow branches. Reaching the edge of the porch, he gently lowered the basket before taking one slow step backward. Emily could finally see its contents. Inside rested fresh honeycomb, fragrant pine herbs, and several tiny purple flowers she had never seen before. The enormous wolf did not immediately leave. Instead, he quietly looked toward the cottage window where the forest crown still rested exactly where Emily had placed it the night before. Something softened in his expression. It almost looked like relief. Emily forgot every warning she had ever heard. Without thinking, she slowly stepped out from behind the oak tree. A dry leaf cracked beneath her boot. The wolf instantly turned toward the sound. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Emily expected the great animal to disappear into the forest as quickly as before, but he remained where he stood. Fear never appeared in his eyes. Neither did anger. He simply watched her with calm patience that felt strangely familiar. Emily slowly lifted one empty hand to show she meant no harm. The wolf lowered his head slightly, not as a threat, but almost as a respectful greeting. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she whispered, barely louder than the morning breeze. "Were all of these gifts from you?" The giant wolf did not answer, yet his golden eyes never left hers. Then, with careful purpose, he nudged the basket a few inches closer to her before turning toward the forest. He paused once at the tree line and looked back over his shoulder as though inviting her to remember the path he had taken. Seconds later, he disappeared among the ancient pines, leaving only the faint impression of enormous paw prints pressed into the damp earth. Emily hurried to the place where he had vanished, but the tracks faded surprisingly quickly beneath fallen leaves until they seemed to disappear completely. Standing alone beneath the towering trees, she realized she no longer wanted to know whether the mysterious wolf was dangerous. She wanted to understand why someone so powerful had chosen kindness over fear every single morning. Emily Carter returned to her cottage carrying the willow basket as though it contained answers instead of simple gifts. She placed the honeycomb, fragrant herbs, and delicate purple flowers beside the earlier treasures that now filled an entire shelf near her window. Looking at them together, she noticed something she had overlooked before. Every gift had arrived exactly when she needed it most. The berries had come after the marketplace ran short of fresh fruit. The mushrooms had appeared when she had little food left for herself. The herbs now resting on her table were the very plants the village healer had mentioned were becoming difficult to find before winter. None of it felt accidental anymore. It felt as though someone had quietly been watching over her life from the shadows. The following afternoon, Emily walked farther into the northern forest than she ever had before. Sunlight filtered gently through towering pine branches while the earthy scent of moss and fallen leaves surrounded her. The forest did not feel threatening. Instead, it carried an unusual stillness that seemed almost welcoming. She paused beside a narrow stream where crystal clear water flowed over smooth stones. There, resting on a flat rock near the water, she found another unexpected surprise. A single white feather lay beside a small bundle of fresh mint tied together with braided grass. No giant wolf was anywhere in sight, yet she could not shake the feeling that patient golden eyes were watching from somewhere beyond the trees. Smiling softly, Emily picked up the herbs and spoke into the quiet forest. "Thank you. I still do not know who you are, but I hope you know your kindness matters." The breeze stirred the pine branches overhead as though carrying her words deeper into the woods. High upon a rocky ridge hidden behind thick evergreens, the enormous black wolf remained perfectly still. He had watched her discover the gift, listened to every word she spoke, and for the first time in many years his guarded expression relaxed into something almost peaceful. He did not step closer. He simply stayed where he was, allowing her gratitude to become another quiet memory he would carry alone. As Emily continued exploring, she noticed something curious. Every animal she encountered behaved differently than expected. Squirrels gathered acorns only a few feet away without fear. Songbirds landed on nearby branches and continued singing. Even a timid fox paused briefly along the trail before calmly disappearing into the underbrush. It was as though the entire forest had accepted her presence. Hours later, dark clouds slowly gathered above the mountains, bringing a steady autumn rain that quickly soaked the winding paths. Emily searched for shelter beneath a large stone overhang, wrapping her coat tightly around herself while cool raindrops splashed against the fallen leaves. A sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, carrying the unmistakable scent of rain and pine. Then she heard slow footsteps somewhere beyond the curtain of falling water. Her heart skipped as the giant black wolf emerged from the mist. His thick fur glistened with rain, yet his calm golden eyes never left hers. This time he did not leave a gift and disappear. Instead, he quietly approached until only a few yards separated them. Emily remained completely still. The wolf lowered himself onto the damp forest floor, resting peacefully beneath the shelter's edge, as though inviting her to see him not as a monster, but as another traveler waiting for the storm to pass. Minutes slipped by in comfortable silence while rain drummed softly against the stone above them. Emily realized she was no longer afraid. She was simply curious. When the storm finally began to fade, the giant wolf slowly stood and looked toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest before glancing back at her once more. It was not a command. It was not even a request. It felt like an invitation, gentle enough that she could refuse, yet honest enough that she found herself taking one careful step in the same direction. Emily Carter hesitated for only a moment before following the giant black wolf along the narrow forest trail. He never looked back to make certain she was still there, yet somehow he always chose a path that was easy enough for her to cross. Fallen branches seemed to have been moved aside long before they reached them, and every steep slope curved gently into a safer route. It was almost as though he already knew exactly where each obstacle waited. After nearly half a mile, the wolf stopped beside an ancient stone circle covered in emerald moss. Sunlight slipped through the towering pines, casting warm beams across weathered carvings that had nearly disappeared beneath the passing centuries. Emily slowly stepped closer, fascinated by symbols she had never seen before. They resembled wolves standing beneath stars, surrounded by circles that intertwined like promises carried through generations. Before she could examine them more carefully, the giant wolf quietly nudged a small leather pouch toward her with his nose. Inside, she discovered several polished crystal stones unlike anything sold in the village marketplace. They glowed softly whenever sunlight touched them, filling the clearing with tiny reflections that danced across the moss-covered stones. Emily smiled with genuine gratitude. "You always seem to know what will make someone smile," she whispered. The giant wolf lowered his head slightly before suddenly lifting his ears toward the distant hills. His peaceful expression changed into one of quiet alertness. Without warning, he stepped backward into the shadows between the trees. Emily heard something she had not noticed before. Horses. Several riders were approaching from the southern road. Within moments, the peaceful silence of the forest gave way to the sound of polished armor, steady hoofbeats, and fluttering banners carrying the silver crest of the Northern Kingdom. At the center of the procession rode a tall man whose calm presence immediately drew every eye. His dark hair moved gently in the afternoon breeze, and his tailored black cloak rested across broad shoulders with effortless dignity. The riders dismounted as they reached the ancient stone circle, respectfully stepping aside while their leader approached alone. Emily had never seen him before, yet something about him felt strangely familiar. The man offered a courteous smile. "I hope we did not interrupt your walk." Emily returned the greeting politely. "Not at all." His thoughtful gaze briefly swept across the crystal stones resting in her hands before returning to her face. "I am Alexander Blackwood." Even without formal introduction, the name carried weight. Every child in the Northern Territories had heard stories about the Alpha King, whose wisdom had brought peace among rival packs for many years. Emily bowed respectfully. "It is an honor to meet you, Your Majesty." Alexander acknowledged the gesture with quiet warmth rather than pride. His attention drifted toward the surrounding forest for the briefest moment before returning to her. Emily gathered enough courage to ask the question that had occupied her thoughts for days. "Your Majesty, have you ever heard of a giant black wolf living in these woods?" For the first time, a nearly invisible pause settled over his expression. It lasted no more than a heartbeat before his calm smile returned. "Many stories are told about these forests," he answered evenly. "Most grow larger each time they are repeated. Emily gently held up the leather pouch. Someone has been leaving gifts for me every morning. Today I followed the wolf here. Alexander examined the pouch without touching it. His golden brown eyes revealed nothing that confirmed surprise or recognition. I am afraid I know nothing about such a creature, he replied with quiet confidence. If a giant wolf truly existed nearby, I believe my scouts would have reported it long ago. His words sounded perfectly reasonable, yet Emily noticed one small detail that refused to leave her thoughts. Resting on the edge of Alexander Blackwood's black cloak was a single long strand of glossy dark fur that shimmered almost blue beneath the afternoon sunlight, identical to the strand she had carefully kept from the woven forest crown. Emily Carter smiled politely as the royal procession departed, yet the image of that single strand of glossy black fur resting against Alexander Blackwood's cloak remained fixed in her thoughts. His answer had sounded calm and convincing, but something inside her refused to believe it completely. She carefully placed the leather pouch inside her satchel before beginning the walk home. Along the winding forest trail, she noticed another strange detail she had overlooked before. Every place where she had discovered one of the mysterious gifts now seemed connected by the same quiet path, almost as though an invisible guide had gently led her from one location to the next without her ever realizing it. Curious, she retraced her steps to the stream where she had found the white feather and the bundle of mint. Nearby, she discovered a patch of healing plants growing beneath a fallen cedar tree. The village healer had searched unsuccessfully for those very herbs only days earlier. Emily gathered several bundles, realizing that without the earlier gift, she never would have wandered far enough to find them. As she continued following the hidden trail, another discovery waited around the next bend. A low branch had been broken just enough to reveal a narrow opening through thick bushes. Beyond it stood a small grove of ancient apple trees, still carrying ripe fruit long after every orchard near the village had finished its harvest. Emily quietly laughed to herself. Every mysterious gift had done more than brighten her mornings. Each one had gently pointed her towards something valuable she otherwise would have missed. The berries had encouraged her to explore a higher hillside where rare medicinal flowers bloomed. The polished stones had led her to the stream whose clear water never froze, even during harsh winters. The fragrant herbs had introduced her to forgotten paths hidden beneath towering pines. None of the gifts had been random acts of generosity. They had been quiet directions toward opportunities waiting just beyond her usual routine. Someone had not simply been watching over her. Someone had been preparing her to discover the forest for herself. That realization settled warmly in her heart. Far deeper among the ancient trees, hidden from every traveler, the giant black wolf watched silently from a rocky overlook. Seeing Emily recognize the pattern filled him with quiet satisfaction. For many seasons he had protected those woods, learning every hidden spring, every healing plant, and every sheltered valley. He had never intended to give her everything with his own hands. He only wished to show her where hope could always be found. As the afternoon sun drifted lower, Emily reached the moss-covered stone circle once again. This time she noticed tiny carvings around its outer edge that the shifting light had revealed. They depicted wolves guiding travelers through forests, across rivers, and toward mountain peaks beneath bright constellations. None of the images showed wolves hunting or frightening anyone. They showed guardians leading lost souls safely home. Emily gently traced one weathered carving with her fingertips. "You were never trying to hide from me," she whispered thoughtfully. "You were trying to teach me." A soft breeze carried the scent of pine across the clearing. Moments later, she heard slow footsteps approaching from behind. Turning around, she found Alexander Blackwood standing alone without his royal guards. He offered the same composed smile she remembered from earlier that day. "I thought I might find you here," he said warmly. Emily studied him for a quiet moment before speaking. "Your Majesty, you told me you knew nothing about the giant wolf." Alexander met her eyes without hesitation. "That is what I said." Emily slowly held up the polished crystal stones from the leather pouch. "Then perhaps you can explain why every gift has led me to places that only someone who truly knows this forest could have chosen." For the first time, his calm expression softened into thoughtful silence. He did not answer immediately, but his gaze drifted toward the towering pines where the evening shadows quietly gathered, as though the forest itself had become part of a promise he was still not ready to break. Alexander Blackwood remained silent for several long moments, his thoughtful gaze fixed on the towering pines, as though the forest itself expected an answer before he could give one. At last he looked back at Emily Carter with quiet sincerity. "Some questions become more dangerous after they are answered," he said gently. "Not because the truth is cruel, but because it cannot be forgotten." Emily studied his calm expression. She had expected another denial, perhaps another careful excuse. Yet his words carried neither deception nor fear. They sounded like the weight of a promise that had lasted far longer than either of them. Before she could ask another question, one of the royal scouts approached from the edge of the clearing and respectfully informed the Alpha King that representatives from neighboring territories had arrived at the castle unexpectedly. Alexander offered Emily a small nod filled with unspoken regret. "I hope we will speak again soon." With that, he mounted his horse and disappeared down the forest road surrounded by his guards. Emily watched until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then she looked toward the deeper woods where she had first met the giant black wolf. A quiet idea began forming in her mind. If Alexander truly knew nothing, then why did every encounter with him seem to end with the same feeling that someone had carefully avoided telling the whole truth? The following morning, Emily rose even earlier than usual. Instead of waiting beside her cottage, she quietly followed the royal road leading toward the distant castle hidden among the northern hills. She found a place overlooking the valley where both the forest trail and the castle entrance could be seen without attracting attention. Hours passed peacefully beneath clear autumn skies. Shortly after noon, she saw Alexander ride out from the castle with several trusted guards, heading toward a neighboring village. Emily remained exactly where she was until the royal procession disappeared beyond the southern hills. Only then did she hurry back through the forest using the hidden paths she had learned from the mysterious gifts. As evening approached, she reached the familiar clearing outside her cottage just as the first stars appeared overhead. She waited quietly beside the old oak tree where she had once hidden before sunrise. The forest remained still. A cool breeze stirred the branches, carrying the comforting scent of pine and damp earth. Then, without warning, the enormous black wolf emerged from the darkness exactly as he always had. Emily felt her heart race, not from fear, but from growing certainty. She had watched Alexander leave the kingdom hours earlier. Yet here stood the giant wolf only moments later. She stepped into the moonlight before he could place another gift on her porch. The wolf froze, his golden eyes meeting hers with calm surprise. Emily smiled softly. "I know you are protecting something," she whispered. "But I also know this." She slowly glanced toward the distant castle barely visible beyond the hills before looking back into his brilliant eyes. "You and the Alpha King have never been in the same place at the same time unless someone else could prove it." The giant wolf did not move. The silence between them stretched beneath the stars until Emily took one careful step closer. She reached into her pocket and removed the single strand of glossy black fur she had kept since finding the woven forest crown. Holding it beside the wolf's thick coat, she saw the same deep midnight color shimmer beneath the moonlight. The match was unmistakable. Still, she did not accuse him. Instead, she gently placed the strand back into her pocket and smiled with quiet understanding. "You do not have to tell me tonight," she said softly. "But someday I hope you will trust me enough to let me know why every answer in this forest seems to lead back to the same heart." The giant wolf lowered his head slowly, not in surrender, but in silent gratitude. And for the first time, Emily noticed that beneath his powerful strength, there was also unmistakable loneliness, as though the greatest burden he carried had never been protecting the forest, but protecting a secret that had kept him standing alone for far too long. The giant black wolf remained motionless beneath the silver glow of the moon, his golden eyes reflecting a quiet struggle that words could no longer hide. Emily Carter did not move any closer. She understood that trust could never be demanded. It could only be given. The forest around them settled into complete silence, as though every ancient tree had paused to witness a decision that had been waiting through countless seasons. At last, the enormous wolf slowly lifted his head toward the night sky. A gentle breeze swept across the clearing, carrying fallen leaves in slow circles around him. Soft light shimmered between the branches above, and before Emily's astonished eyes, the great black wolf was gradually surrounded by a warm golden glow. His powerful form became blurred beneath the dancing light, until, where the wolf had stood only moments before, Alexander Blackwood quietly lowered his hands to his sides. He wore the same black cloak she had seen earlier that day, and in the moonlight the familiar strand of glossy dark fur resting near his shoulder suddenly made perfect sense. Emily looked at him without fear or surprise. Instead, she offered the same gentle smile she had given the mysterious gifts from the very beginning. Alexander released a slow breath, almost as though he had been carrying it for years. "You deserved the truth long ago," he said softly. "I simply hoped I could protect you without asking you to carry the burden that comes with knowing it." Emily remained silent, allowing him to continue. "Long before I became Alpha King, I made a promise before those ancient stones. Every ruler of our people swears never to reveal his true nature to anyone unless absolute trust has already been earned. The promise protects both our kingdom and those we care about. If I had approached you as a king from the beginning, every gift would have looked like a command. If I had remained only the wolf, you would never have known whether to trust your own heart. I chose the harder path because it allowed you complete freedom." Emily thought back to every basket of berries, every flower, every hidden trail, and every quiet act of kindness. Not once had he asked for anything in return. Not once had he expected gratitude. "So every gift," she whispered, "was never meant to make me depend on you." Alexander slowly shook his head. "No, they were meant to help you discover your own strength. I wanted the forest to become your friend, not your prison. I wanted you to know where hope could always be found, even on days when I could not stand beside you." Emily felt warmth spread through her heart as every unanswered question quietly settled into place. The gifts had never been expressions of power. They had always been lessons in trust, patience, and kindness. Alexander looked toward the ancient trees surrounding the clearing. "I told the village nothing because fear grows quickly when people do not understand what they see. A giant wolf walking among their homes would become a story of danger, even if every step carried only peace." Emily smiled gently. Then perhaps the story needed someone willing to see past appearances. Their eyes met once more, and this time no secrets stood between them. A family of deer quietly emerged from the forest and crossed the clearing without hesitation, passing beside Alexander as calmly as though they had known him their entire lives. Birds settled onto nearby branches despite the late hour, filling the quiet air with soft songs that sounded almost welcoming. The forest itself seemed to breathe more easily now that the truth had finally been spoken. Alexander looked at Emily with quiet gratitude. "You are the first person who met both sides of me and chose kindness before certainty." Emily answered with calm sincerity. "Because the wolf introduced himself long before the king ever did." Morning arrived beneath a sky painted with soft shades of gold, and for the first time since the mysterious gifts had begun appearing, Emily Carter stepped onto her porch knowing exactly whose quiet kindness had filled each sunrise. Resting beside the front step was one final basket, woven more carefully than any before. Inside she found no rare berries, no flowers, and no polished stones. Instead, there was a small wooden compass carved by hand from pale maple, its surface decorated with the same ancient wolf symbols she had seen on the moss-covered stone circle. Tucked beneath it rested a single folded note written in elegant handwriting. It simply read, "You no longer need gifts to find your way." Emily smiled as she gently closed her fingers around the compass. She understood its meaning immediately. Every path she had learned, every hidden spring she had discovered, every healing herb she could now recognize had become part of her own journey. The forest no longer felt mysterious because someone had patiently taught her how to see it with confidence instead of fear. Later that afternoon, Alexander Blackwood returned, not surrounded by royal guards or ceremonial banners, but walking alone along the familiar woodland trail. He looked less like a king arriving for official duty and more like the quiet guardian she had come to know beneath the towering pines. Emily welcomed him with the easy smile of an old friend. Together they wandered through the forest without rushing, stopping beside the clear stream, the ancient apple grove, and finally the weathered stone circle where everything had quietly begun. Alexander looked around the peaceful clearing before speaking. "For many years I believed protecting someone meant remaining hidden." Emily gently turned the carved compass in her hands. "Sometimes protection begins that way," she answered softly. But trust grows only when both people are willing to be seen. Alexander nodded with quiet understanding. The burden he had carried for so long seemed lighter than ever before. As the seasons slowly changed, the northern village changed with them. Emily shared the hidden locations of healing herbs, fresh springs, and fruit trees with the village healer and her neighbors. Families who had once feared the forest gradually learned to respect it instead. Hunters stopped telling stories about a terrifying shadow among the pines and began speaking about the mysterious guardian whose presence always seemed to bring peace to wandering travelers. No one ever learned every secret of the giant black wolf, and neither Emily nor Alexander tried to explain them. Some truths did not need to become legends to have meaning. They only needed to make people's lives a little kinder. Whenever royal responsibilities allowed, Alexander visited the forest without ceremony, and Emily always seemed to know exactly where to find him. Sometimes they spent hours walking beneath the ancient trees without saying much at all. Silence had become another language they both understood. It was the same quiet language that had once been spoken through baskets of berries, woven flowers, and carefully chosen paths. Years later, children growing up in the village would sometimes discover small gifts resting beside forgotten trails after difficult storms had passed. A bundle of fresh herbs would appear where someone needed comfort. A basket of ripe fruit would wait beside a lonely cabin. Travelers who had lost their way often found a carved wooden marker pointing them safely home. No one could ever explain who left them there. Some smiled and thanked the forest. Others thanked the old stories they had once doubted. Emily would simply glance toward the distant pine trees where sunlight danced across the branches, knowing that true strength had never announced itself with power. It had arrived quietly, one thoughtful gift at a time, until fear gave way to trust, mystery became understanding, and two hearts found each other not because destiny demanded it, but because kindness had patiently shown them the way.